I've always been a creature of the night. There's a certain kind of peace you can only find in a city after midnight, when the frantic energy of the day has bled away, leaving behind a skeleton crew of streetlights, stray cats, and the occasional insomniac like myself. For about 5 years, I lived downtown in a city that never truly slept, but certainly quieted down after 1 a.m. My apartment was small, the walls thin, and the constant thrum of urban life often felt suffocating during the day. So, I developed a habit: late-night walks. Usually between 1 and 2 in the morning, I'd wander the deserted streets, listening to my own footsteps echo, feeling a sense of solitary ownership over the concrete landscape. This particular night, maybe 4 years ago now, started like any other. It was a Wednesday, technically Thursday morning by then, pushing towards 2 a.m. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the evening and the omnipresent smell of exhaust fumes and damp pavement. I was walking a route I hadn't taken in a while, several blocks east of my usual paths, near a small, dimly lit park bordered by old brownstones and shuttered storefronts. The silence here was deeper, broken only by the distant siren song of traffic on a far-off highway and the rhythmic hum of the sodium streetlights casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the slight breeze. That's when I first saw him. He was maybe a block down, emerging from the deeper darkness where the streetlight coverage was patchier. His silhouette was immediately strange, disjointed. He wasn't just walking. He was performing some kind of bizarre, stilted dance as he moved towards me. It was like a waltz step, but grotesque. One normal step, followed by a long, theatrical, almost gliding stride that ate up the pavement. It looked unnatural, like a marionette being clumsily manipulated. Curiosity warred with a prickle of unease. I stopped under a streetlight, watching him, trying to make sense of the erratic movement. Was he drunk? High? Performing some strange street art? He was dressed in what looked like an old, somewhat ill-fitting suit, dark and maybe a little rumpled. As he drew closer, maybe half a block away now, more details became visible in the orange glow. His head was tilted sharply back, his face angled directly towards the starless, light-polluted sky, and he was smiling. Not just smiling. It was a grin of impossible proportions, a rictus that stretched his mouth far too wide, pulling the corners of his lips up towards his ears in a terrifying caricature of joy. It looked painted on, utterly static, devoid of any genuine mirth or muscular tension. It was the smile of a mannequin, or something far worse. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't funny, wasn't performance art. This felt wrong. Primal instinct screamed at me to get away. I abruptly crossed the street, putting the width of the asphalt between us. My heart was starting to beat a little faster now, the peaceful solitude of the night shattered. When I reached the opposite curb, I risked a glance back. My blood ran cold. He had stopped dancing. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the street, directly under a streetlight facing me. But his head was still tilted back, gazing blindly at the sky, that same horrifying, rictus grin plastered across his face. He hadn't reacted to my crossing the street, hadn't acknowledged my presence in any way, except by stopping his bizarre advance. It was as if I were a bug he'd noticed, but hadn't yet decided whether to crush. I turned away sharply, forcing myself to walk. Just keep moving, I told myself. He's just some lunatic, don't engage, don't look back. My pace quickened, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the empty sidewalk. I walked briskly for a block, then another, forcing myself to focus on the rhythm of my breathing, the cracks in the pavement. Anything but the figure behind me. He's gone, I tried to rationalize. He was probably just messed up, stopped to catch his breath. Maybe he turned down a side street. I walked another 4 blocks, the silence pressing in on me, thicker now, heavier. The distant traffic seemed muffled. The city felt like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the background hum. Tap, 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 footsteps. But not normal footsteps. They were light, quick, almost delicate, like someone running lightly on the balls of their feet, tiptoeing at speed. Tap, 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 tap. My heart leaped into my throat. Adrenaline surged through me, cold and sharp. I didn't dare look back. Not yet. I just walked faster, my brisk walk turning into a near jog. The tapping behind me kept pace, never getting closer, never falling further behind. Constant, relentless, tap, 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 tap. Who runs like that? It sounded ridiculous, childish almost, but layered over the memory of that grotesque smile, it was pure, undiluted terror. I had to see. I had to know. Risking a glance over my shoulder, my breath hitched in my chest, a choked gasp escaping my lips. He was there, maybe 20, 30 feet behind me. He wasn't walking or dancing anymore, he was running. But it was the most unnatural, terrifying run I could ever conceive of. He moved with those same exaggerated, cartoonish tiptoe steps, his legs bending at odd angles, his arms held stiffly at his sides. It was like watching a character from an old, silent film, sped up and injected with pure nightmare fuel. And his head was still tilted back, staring sightlessly at the sky, that same impossibly wide, fixed smile splitting his face. He was sprinting towards me, head angled towards the heavens, smiling his rictus grin. Logic dissolved. Rational thought evaporated. Only pure, primal fear remained. I broke into a full sprint, lungs burning, legs pumping like pistons. I didn't care where I was going, just away from him. The tiptoeing footsteps behind me sped up, impossibly fast, impossibly light. It sounded like he was barely touching the ground, yet he was gaining on me. I could hear the tap, tap, tap getting closer, faster, right behind my heels. I risked another glance. He was closer now, much closer, his smiling face tilted towards the indifferent sky, a predator closing in on its prey. I ran harder than I ever thought possible, tears streaming down my face, blurring the streetlights. Block after block flew by in a terrified haze. Dark alleys, boarded-up windows, overflowing dumpsters. The sound of his pursuit was a constant rhythm of dread behind me. Finally, I saw it. The glow of a busier intersection ahead. Headlights flashed past. The sound of actual traffic, faint but growing louder. Hope surged through me, giving my legs one last burst of speed. I burst onto the brighter street, stumbling into the crosswalk, nearly colliding with a late-night taxi that blared its horn. I spun around, chest heaving, gasping for air, bracing myself for the final confrontation. He was gone. The quieter street I had just emerged from was empty. Completely empty. Just the flickering streetlights, the long shadows, and the distant city hum returning to its normal cadence. No sign of the dancing, smiling, tiptoeing man. It was as if he had simply vanished into the thin air, dissolved back into the night that had spawned him. I leaned against a lamppost, shaking uncontrollably, trying to catch my breath, scanning the shadows, expecting him to reappear at any moment. But he didn't. I eventually made my way home, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow, every distant sound. I double-locked my door, wedged a chair under the knob, and sat awake until dawn. The image of that smile burned behind my eyelids. I moved out of that apartment a few months later. I don't take late-night walks anymore, not even in well-lit areas. The city at night no longer feels peaceful. It feels like a stage, waiting for the wrong actor to appear. I still don't know what he was or what he wanted. A ghost? A demon? Just a profoundly disturbed human being? It doesn't matter. Because sometimes when I'm alone, especially when it's dark and quiet, I can still see him in my mind's eye. That impossibly wide, terrifying smile, tilted back, staring eternally up at the empty sky.